Thank you for inviting me to talk about the research that I'm doing with my students and collaborators at Percy Lab. I skipped this one because I got introduced. So I'm working at the University of Maine, and lots of people have asked me where's Maine or where's the University of Maine. This is like part of our campus, and this is one of the highlight of like in New England. Like the fall is very beautiful, the fall foliage, and this is one of the pictures. If you're interested to visit me, I would say fall is the best time of the year to visit. It's extremely gorgeous. So, just overview of what I'm working on. Like generally, my research is like at the intersection of privacy, ethics, and software engineering. And the goal is like from mostly like developers' point of view to help them develop tools that are privacy preserving for end users. So we study like developers and end users, like their challenges, their needs, and then translate those into some kind of solutions. For example, automated like generation of privacy captions. And we apply like software engineering techniques. And beside that, like we use like an NLP LLM for doing all of these different tasks. So all of the underlying tasks in software engineering, they have NLP LLM flavors in them. And today, mostly, I will focus on the first one, and these two going hand in hand. A little bit of like both of them, like findings and like some of the solutions that we have. So first thing, some of the research is that we want to first understand what are the challenges and then provide them solutions based on those challenges. And we have done several studies, like we use like different tools. Some of our studies are done on Prolific. You see some of like the notations, and then like on Reddit and Hugging Face. And with these studies, we target developers or practitioners that are dealing with privacy ethics and GDPR compliance. We look at to understand what are their level of familiarities, what are their practices and expertise, if there are differences, for example, because of location or other demographics. And also we found that in some of our studies that they use a lot of like the forums, and we look at to see what are their motivations and how they are using them, how they apply the solutions they get. So one of the first studies that I'm going to talk about is that what developers say about AI ethics. AI ethics became very important when, especially in EU, that EU AI Act was passed and got enacted. And we try to see that like, if like AI development teams could be like AI requirements engineer or developers or like security privacy experts, ethicists, or even like researchers, how much they are familiar with these like principles, with the regulations, what they do to, are they considering ethics when they are implementing like AI, like using AI models or developing them, and if they are also, for example, have any risk mitigation strategies to minimize some of the risk of AI. So we did this study with 414 participants, and when you look at that, we targeted like prolific users, like we went to several Reddit subreddits related to AI, and also we use Hugging Face. Like we advertise our survey there, and we got like lots of response. Like after doing like extensive data cleaning, we had more than 400 participants from 43 countries. And we had some groups that they were not implementing AI or using AI in their job, but they were still AI. They were familiar with AI, but their companies were not really adopting AI tools. And then, but most of them were adopting AI tools. We first try to see that how they see AI. Everybody has like different ideas what AI is, and we asked them to define it, and we use this framework to like map them to what can be. And most of them, they thought AI as a process automation or performance enhancement. Some of them also thought about, okay, data synthesis, data analysis are basically, if you ask, okay, what is AI, they consider it as like data analysis. Those that they haven't really used AI or adopted it at their work, they were more excited about like using generative AI, or like there's like so much more positive, like this is like the best thing, for example, in the world and all that. We asked them some question about that. Do they think like having some kind of AI governance, like laws, regulations, do they think that it would help like having better AI models, or it will hinder or like be like against like their innovation and all these things? And we got like 50-50, almost 50-50. Some people were so positive that, yeah, we need regulations. It will even foster more AI development, but lots of people also were saying that, oh, like this will be a barrier to like having like some innovation in AI. We then went to like AI ethics principles. AI ethics principles are kind of, if you are familiar, for example, with privacy by design, they're kind of similar to those. Lots of researchers try to see that, okay, based on these AI initiatives, like EU AI Act or like NIST framework, what guidelines we can have so that like the AI developers could follow to make sure that they have like high standard, for example, for human rights, for privacy. They're not creating like discrimination. They don't have introduced biases, and they have, for example, explainable model and all that. Many researchers looked at principles differently. We focused on Worsdorfer work on AI ethics principle, which kind of combined several of these principles together and created a holistic view of them. When you think about them, some of them are like a little bit more clear for you, some of them are very abstract. And that is also what we found, that what, for example, democracy and rule of law was like a little bit more abstract for people. So we asked them, we gave those definitions of AI like ethics principle to them and asked like the different members of the teams that how familiar they are. Overall, we found that, interestingly, and I say interestingly, keep that in mind because I get back to this privacy part in some like further slides. A lot of people were like, oh, we are familiar with the concepts of data privacy and data protection and privacy, but some of the more abstract concepts, they were not as familiar. So like, for example, transparency, explainability, because there are research also on explainable AI, there are models that are used that they try to have some explainability embedded to them. They were more like easily tangible for the members of software AI teams. But anything that was a little bit more abstract concepts, they had like some hardship for understanding them. But I found that interesting that lots of them, they thought AI in terms of privacy. Which I keep that in mind. Why I say it's interesting, because I get back to like how they also define privacy. We dig into like different like demographics. It's very busy, so I will spend like a little bit of time on it. And there's like different aspects. So here there were different roles. This is the managers. Like when we asked like AI managers, they were like overall they were more familiar with the principles than other groups. In the information security privacy teams, interestingly, they claim that they were less familiar, except for the data protection and privacy. We are not sure why. It can be that they are more cautious, maybe, I'm not sure. That's because like privacy is like they're part of their task and they didn't like know about other ones, or they were not as like familiar, so they basically put it less. Maybe they were more critical than the other ones. But the developers, quality assurance, and requirements engineer, these are the ones that they are more technical people. They consider like these principles like that they were not really familiar with, which could be problematic because they are the one that they need to make sure that their data is fair, they don't have discrimination when they are looking at data, it's diverse enough, and they don't have any biases in them, and they had less familiarity, so we need something for them. There's another interesting thing we found, which is like, first when my student gave me the results, I'm like, okay, it's wrong. Like, how can it be that EU people are less familiar with these principles? And I had to go and check with him, double check many times, and like, this was the result. They claimed that they were less familiar than North Americans and also the rest of the world. And we haven't tested why, but my hypothesis is that in Europe, there's EU AI Act, and if they don't comply with it, they get fined. And so maybe they are more cautious to claim that they are familiar, and if they are not 100% familiar, because there's like some more basically precaution for them, something that they need to think about more, and probably that's why they were a little bit more critical about themselves, about like claiming familiarity, than people from North America. That's like, oh, we just know the concept. They don't need to comply because they don't get fined. There's no AI rule or regulation in, for example, US or Canada. So I think that this was just their judgment was like a little bit more critical of themselves. Another interesting thing was that, and this was like held in every question we asked, like also for regulation for practices, female participants, they were more familiar, they cared more about lots of things. We also did statistical analysis, and it held that they are like really, female participants were more familiar with like AI ethics principles. We will see it for other ones too. And we have two gender. We asked them, like we had like the non-binary and other genders, but we only had one person that like answered like that. So most of our participants were either female or male. These two also went kind of hand in hand. Most of like the medium-sized companies, they claim they're more familiar. The small companies, they don't have the capacity to deal with regulations as much. We saw that also before in privacy research. They didn't have like that much of familiarity. And larger companies, probably they have like delegated people to deal with like ethics, same as like privacy. That's why maybe they were less, and the medium-sized companies are the one that they need to do lots of things themselves in-house. And similar, like government and academics, they had more familiarity, and maybe because of, we don't have a follow-up of like why this is the case, but so example, startups again goes hand in hand with small companies. They had less familiarity with that. We also looked at, okay, what factors predict familiarity? We did some regression analysis called lasso test to identify like what goes hand in hand. And we find that, for example, the familiarity with EU AI Act will increase, like the ones basically that they had higher familiarity with AI Act also had higher familiarity with AI ethics principle, which makes sense. And you might say that, okay, how come like EU people were less familiar? There's like, it was overall, and like with other regulations, they were also claiming that they are not as familiar with them. But also when they were thinking that these regulations will have like positive impact, they also know more about the AI ethics principles. Means that they care about these ethical principles, and they think that there should be some kind of regulations to make sure that we are following these standards. We did the same. We asked them the same about the different governance initiatives. There are not that many regulations that they are already passed. Our study was before Trump gets into power, and we had these like Biden initiatives, like lots of US initiatives. They are not in place anymore. So it would be interesting to do their study again and see how it changed, especially in the US. But there were, the level of familiarity with regulations were less. Like generally we see it was between 58 to 62%. So not that many people knew about these regulations. And this will be contrasted with privacy regulation, and you will see that how different it is with that. But again, the same thing. Some of it are very similar, but one thing that I found interesting is that even though the familiarities are low, in the ones from EU, they had the highest familiarity for EU AI Act, which makes sense. But for everything else, they didn't really know about it, and probably because they don't need to care because they have this comprehensive regulation here. But everything else kind of was similar to the findings of the familiarity with principles. Again, also female were more familiar with these like regulations than male participants. And along with that, beside the familiarity, we also looked at, asked them that when they are like dealing with developing AI models or like creating data sets, how much they consider these AI principles. And also with the statistical analysis, we found like, that we had like significant differences between female and male. Also, in terms of like how to mitigate the risks of these AI models, again, female were more, they had like significant difference, and female basically reported more about that they care about like mitigation strategies more. This was interesting. We never did this one, like these type of analysis, female, male, with other studies. So it was for us interesting to see that how is like also the gender differences. And we went through that, okay, what kind of risk mitigation strategies do you use to minimize the risk of AI models? There's like, the models can be, like have some biases in them. For example, we know that like sometimes models have bias towards, like in the facial recognition, the white male. So like anybody else that is not in that category, they can't like have high accuracy for them because they were not trained with that. Or like sometimes like police data, for example, will show that they flag black people more as criminal than like white people. And those are all biases that are like effect like with the data that they didn't have also, and with the way that models are developed, that they create those. So there should be like some ways to like mitigate these. And there were some techniques that used, most of them, they were thinking about the engineering solution and the governance, or like anything that like comes from regulations, or doing something before even jumping into like developing the models or developing the data sets, was like not as much like they thought about them. But some of the things, like security was the highest. So we saw that they say like ethics, principles, data protection, privacy, but then when you dig into it, like a lot of times we come back to the same conclusion that privacy, they also see it as security. And we found that in other studies too. Some of the things that should be important and they didn't really think about, like bias testing. After like the models are developed, like we get the results, there should be like the quality assurance, they should do like some testing, make sure that there is no bias in them. And it was not many people really cared about that like strategies. So it's like very diverse. With data, it's like already, because has been a lot in the discussion, as I gave you the example of like white male, for example, has better. So like people know that they have to create like more diverse data so that their models are less biased. But so that one, like they care more. Following regulation, okay, it's very abstract though. So some of the strategies were abstract, some of them they had in between, but there's like, first of all, not many people answered this mitigation. And when we look at here, there were lots of them that they were even uncertain what kind of risk mitigation to use. And when we looked at data, for example, for environmental social responsibility, most of them they answered that they don't really know any risk mitigation. Environmental social responsibility were related that the models should have like less carbon footprint, for example, or be like more environmental friendly. And those are the things that they didn't really know how to mitigate those risks, like how, because especially these days with these large models, they create lots of like emissions and carbon footprints. With transparency explainability, same thing that I told you before, because there are technical concepts of explainability AI. They knew a little bit more how to mitigate the risk for that, but anything else like was like, a lot of them, they were uncertain, they didn't answer. And that's what was the reason that we didn't also get that many strategies from all of these 400 participants that we had. So they might claim they're familiar with these principles or regulations, but they really don't act on them. So we still have problems. And one of the things that we don't really have tools for them to help them to like implement these like abstract principles in their day-to-day life. We asked them a little bit of like, okay, like what are the techniques? So we had open-ended questions too. And for example, for data diversity was something that they came up a lot. Like we saw it also in the risk mitigation. And they were basically saying that, okay, we do fairness assessment to make sure that we don't discriminate against any group of people, or we ensure that the data sets are diverse and representative. That's something, because as I said, there's a lot of discussion about that, was something that was in their mind as okay, how they can mitigate risk of AI. But when we look at privacy, security, like the solutions that they were saying, okay, how they can ensure that the data, like they ensure privacy of the data that they collect, encryption coming up like all the time, anonymization techniques, and data minimization. But like encryption is coming always, which is more of a security concept than like privacy concept. Which was also interesting. They had also another one was that, okay, we will have like security protocols in place. So mindsets again is security over privacy. We also ask managers if they want to promote AI ethics, what they do. And they had like some of them, like most of them, like, okay, we will have AI training or AI ethics guideline. And some, they said they have AI ethics committee, but it's mostly towards the bigger companies. But the regular audit was like had lower importance for them. And they said that the responsibility should be with upper management and the AI development team. Interestingly, AI ethics committees had lower responsibility for implementing AI ethics, or even the legal team, which was like, I don't know why, like it should be also, these should be high and even maybe even higher than the other ones. And another one, requirements analysis. Requirements is very important because before you even jump into development, you need to make sure that you have like proper requirements in place, and you also have, for example, ethics requirements in place. There were some that they consider like ethics requirements, but about 56%. So lots of like developers or requirements engineers, they were not even thinking about ethics requirements when they were developing these documents. So if you don't have them, how do you want to test them? How do you want to implement them and test them? So that's like also somehow alarming. And they also, like about 30% of them were saying that this hinder, if you have ethics requirement, hinder development. So that's probably one of the reasons that they don't even include it in their documentation. So it's like having a little bit of a negative impact on like if they want, ethics is hindering their innovation and these things. So they didn't want to have like almost half of them to have any ethics requirements in that, or they didn't even consider it. So like about these ones, what to do, there are lots of things like in terms of research education we can do. For example, in privacy, we have these threat modelings that they help to understand, okay, what are the threats of like when you're like collecting data and these things. Like there's one very famous Linden framework, which is based on also GDPR. Might need to create some things for ethics, or having some tools to focus on ethics by design. We talk about that, we have this privacy by design, but nothing like really as that can nudge them towards like thinking about ethics before even jumping into development, or like translating these regulations into some requirements already for them so that they can just get them and use them in their tools, or nudging them. And at the same time, as educators, like creating some modules, something that like, goes beyond just like, okay, these are ethics principles, like having like how to do ethical risk assessment, how to be more like implement transparency, or having like better practical means for governance framework. So these were like some of the things we did with ethics, but we saw that there were like a lot of them, they talk about privacy. So we wanted to see that also how developers talk about privacy, and if they think about ethics as privacy, do they really know about like privacy regulations, familiar with them? Do they like use privacy tools and these things in their day-to-day life? And we did another study. This was like with 362 participants in 23 countries, and this was only done on Prolific. And we asked them to define privacy, and most of them were in terms of like traditional definition of privacy, which is like control over your data. So they were defining it like that. And when we look at the familiarity here, you see how the number is different. In AI ethics, the regulations, the maximum familiarity was 62%. with like regulations like GDPR and HIPAA, there's like higher familiarity because they're more established probably, and they have been, like GDPR is very like active, like the DPAs are active for finding if like you're not following. So it's like a little bit more established. There are regulations like specific to US. Even like in US and Canada, we had like not that many numbers from Canada, so mostly Americans, they even were not as familiar. So it was the same, in the same line as AI ethics regulations or governance. But generally, like the ones that they were older or they had, like they were more established, they claimed that they were more familiar with. Security privacy teams, they were mostly familiar with all the regulations, and quality assurance teams, they just didn't, which was also for us very alarming, because when you develop a tool, you need to make sure that you test it and they have to satisfy the requirements. And some of the requirements are from regulations, from privacy. If you don't test it, you won't know that if they're really satisfying. And if you're not familiar, which also QA, they didn't really care about privacy, so that other teams will take care of that. That was for us alarming when we found out about that. But when we asked them about privacy tools, things that came up were, again, security. And this is like similar to what researchers like before us they did, that they were saying that developers think of privacy as security concepts. We found that they think about ethics as privacy concepts, but do they really know privacy? No, they think about privacy as security. So at the end, everything goes with security rather than all of these other newer concepts that they need to follow. And there are privacy by design. I talk about ethics by design. There are privacy by design, and they were familiar with some of them, but like some, like the ones that are related to notice and consent, they were familiar with, or like these ones that are more towards like security. But anything that was like more privacy aspects, they were also least familiar with, like developers. But we also thought that, okay, lots of them, they were saying when they have questions about like privacy, they either like try to seek like inside like their company, but a lot of them were like going to different forums, and some of them like on a daily basis, they were using the forums. So we found that that's like these are popular, and they are used with developers to ask their questions related to privacy. So we asked them, we went to some of these forums and did a survey with them and asked them about their motivation for using these forums. Those that they were saying that they are mostly creating posts, they had like different types of motivation, but the most motivations they had, the top ones were to start a discussion, seek advice, or also share their knowledge. So they go to these forums for their privacy or GDPR compliance issues, a lot of them for seeking advice. The ones that they just mostly reply, they don't post, they go there to reply, they were mostly wanted to share their perspective or also provide help and advice. There were a group of them that they said that they just go and read. They don't really actively post or reply to these, like, and this was done only on Reddit, but they were basically to get up to date and to gather information and seeing some discussion. But these are like basically becomes like sources that they go and like try to learn about GDPR or privacy concepts and these things. And because like we know that they use that for seeking advice or getting up to date, we asked them that, okay, if you get these advice, how do you assess that the advice are correct and credible? And I know, Christiana, you did some work on the answers that they were not accurate. And we found that, okay, there are some that they say that they check the history or user profile. They actively do some credibility analysis. But some of them were also saying that they just use the response directly, or they don't even know, they don't do anything. They don't even seek credibility, and they just, they don't care about that. But those that they were in that category, they were, for example, saying that they check with reputable news to seek credibility, looking for the citation, feedback from others, which still is not really, means sometimes we might all give wrong answer. So like this was like for us also something that, okay, we need some tools for developers, or at least helping them to assess these credibilities. Like maybe Same as like that, sometimes these like LLM models, like they say, okay, this is like hallucinated, or like this might not be accurate enough. Maybe we can also have some embedded tools that help them, that if the responses they're getting from these forums are correct or not, or creating some tools for them that help them. Instead of going to forums, they can go to some tools that like we create by development, by regulators, like by the help of regulators, that they can ask their question and get credible responses instead of going to forums. Because these are all show that why we have sometimes non-compliance, because like people might not, they just go and ask questions on places and they don't check the sources. On the same forums, we also try to see what are their concerns about GDPR. In this case, we just focus on GDPR. And most of the questions that they had were around consent. First, we found a lot of consent, and then we decided to separate them. Cookie consent and general consent, just consent for anything else besides cookies, were the most challenges that they had. And they, for example, wanted advice about how to properly obtain marketing consent. Or they wanted to know how to manage sensitive data with remote. So this was more about the data transfer to like other countries. Or like this was more about the DSAR, which like what data should be included in these requests. It's like the data subject access request. So there were like diverse questions asked, but majority of them were about consent, which goes hand in hand with also notice. So how to give notice and then how to obtain the consent. And so we found that this is the problem that developers have, like a lot of times, like about like giving notice, providing notice, accurate notice, and get consent. So we try to create some tools for them to help them create accurate notices, so that they can get the users can be informed and have informed consent. So our goal was like for bridging some of these problems that we had in creating accurate notices, that developers want to have notices to users that explain what personal information is used, how it is used, and why. So focusing on what, how, and why. And this was something that we digged in to see that how they do it, like how they basically create privacy policy or notices. And the responses, like, yeah, 64% said that they use legal experts, but still some of them, together with legal experts, they were also saying other things. They're using templates or privacy policy generators. And they were, a lot of them were concerned about compliance with regulation, but also make sure that what they are providing is complete and correct. So these were some of the most challenging things they have when they wanted to create privacy notices. Why is this a problem to use templates or generators? We can see one example. Like this was like one app like we took a long time ago, and we saw that in their permission list that is basically coming from the code, they were basically accessing the precise location. And when we look at their privacy policy and about the data that they are using or they are basically obtaining indirectly, we don't see any location there. So there's a mismatch. They were not complete or correct, as we said before. So their challenge was that there's not complete or correct. So we might have like mismatches between code and privacy documents if we just use these templates or generators, which are very abstract, rather than like exactly matching with the actual data practice. So we try to create some solution for that. And our solution is called PriGen, which is an approach to create basically consistent privacy notices. And this is like what we do with basically identifying the privacy behaviors in source code and then generating privacy captions, which privacy captions are short natural language sentences that describe privacy behavior of code. Here, our source code, our apps are Android apps. We only focus on Android. And we developed this framework, tool-supported framework, which has 3 components. It's very detailed. I'm just going to give you an overview, high-level overview of it. But in the first step, we identify the path in the code that the data flows. So we do heuristic-based taint analysis to identify those paths that the data, as soon as the data is collected, until like it's basically passed to a method or passed moves out of the app. So like from source to sink. And then we extract them. We use static analysis to extract and mapping them with source code. We get like a large source code concept. And then we pass it to some LLM and we generate natural language statement. A lot of things in it. Don't get stressed. I will just talk a little bit about that. One thing was that like we have these tools that they do taint analysis, identify source to sink, where the data first got access until how it is used in the app. But we had some problems with the taint analysis tools. We needed to know the methods that we are passing a priori, but we couldn't. So we came up with some heuristic-based analysis approach, which basically we create like a model of the source code, which is called call graph. And we identify all of those methods that they're not the source, they're like passing them, the data is passed through them as our sink. And then we run this same analysis and see that if like it's basically, we go through like 6 paths, 6 like levels of it, and we see that if this is like, this sink is the one that's actually a sink, so the ones that we identified. And we use LLM for that. And it works, like what we did, like it worked well for few of these APIs that like Android has, but some of them were like we couldn't, and we just like put it as future work. And because they're not, these are some of them that have some external APIs used, and that was one of the challenges that we couldn't get the sink, like identify the taint path for them. But this is basically an example of it. This is where the method is collected. You don't need to know like any of the detail of it, the statements, but we basically get like the first time that the method is invoked, and then through the whole path, it can be many paths in between, and then where the data is sent to at the end. So it can be like just like an internal class, or it can be like, for example, third-party library. But this one we can't just use as is, and we need to basically map it to the source code to get also the detail of like that. So what each of these path layers, like you can't really understand because it's called GIMPL. GIMPL model is not really human readable, but we want to get this one to pass it to LLM to be able to translate it to a natural language statement. And for this one, we again use some like static analysis tools, but with that you can just get high-level methods. We wanted statement level, so very exact, like these statements that are related to privacy. So we also used, again, we tried it with different LLM, and we found that like with LLMs we could accurately like map these together. We tested it with 100 apps, and they identified that, okay, this one is mapping, for example, to which statement in that taint path. We got all of this, and then we passed it to the generator. I will go to, like, we created a prompt. I'm not going to explain the prompt, but this is what the generator, I'm going to explain it a little bit later, but we needed a data set to be able to implement the whole approach. And just wanted to show you that how extensive was it. So all of those tasks that we did, identifier, extractor, end up having multiple files, like a lot of files, that each of them had paths that were related to the privacy, that the data was passed. And we basically like pass all of these data to LLM to generate natural language for us. What we needed was that we wanted to make sure that our models are correct, so we needed a ground truth, and we didn't have ground truth. So asking anybody to like go through these these files, and this was just for one app, and write the statements is very hard. So we use some base approach without like all of like the taint analysis and these things, and we generated some baseline caption, and then we did like some analysis with developers. We created this tool. We showed them they had to come up with the top 3 most important privacy-related statements, and then they had to evaluate the accuracy of those captions that were generated by a baseline model that we had by the LLM. So we had kind of a human-in-the-loop approach. they had to analyze it based on conciseness, completeness, and accuracy. And also, if they were not saying that, okay, this is correct, they explain why. And at the same time, we had two different versions of the same result of the natural language statement. And we asked them that which of them they prefer, and then if they didn't prefer any of them, to write that. So what you see here is that those classes, basically, when we pass them to LLM, they create these statements for us, which basically describes exactly what the app is doing. We had like about 589 samples, and after doing data cleaning with developers, we came up with 442. We also had very extensive way of like making sure that these like prolific developers that we used, they knew about it. Besides using the domain expert, we also used gave 30 developers this task, and the ones they got a simple task. After that, we looked at them. Those that they didn't respond correctly, we didn't ask them for follow-up studies, but the ones that they did correctly, then we passed 16 of them we selected for the rest of the study. And then we try to, compare to the baseline, this extensive approach that we had, does it improve the accuracy of the translation? So we did two analyses between that, which of the configuration of the PryGen, we use different LLMs, does better, and if the PryGen approach, which had the identifier extractor and the generator, would work better than just a baseline that you give the whole code to the LLM and say that generate the captions. And we used several models that we didn't use in the baseline, and also some judges to judge the result of that. Just want to give you an example of, this was the baseline without having any code context, without having the taint path, that what are the most important privacy statements in the code. It was just giving the whole source code to the LLM. And then when we had our approach with different model, we got some more detailed results, what is this. So the sentence, for example, says this app accesses your GPS location data, including coordinates and timestamp to track your last known location, and logs this information for statistical analysis and debugging purposes. Very detailed, much more detailed than the first one. And these two are almost similar, but a little bit more wordy. The same thing goes with this one. This one, again, has more context than the baseline, but these ones, they are more detailed, but also more wordy. So but these were all generated by our own models, by our own approach. This one was just like a baseline. So we tried to see that which one of these are better, and we used the LLM as judge to analyze them. So we had 3 judges, Llama, Gemini, and Mistral, and asked the judges to say, okay, in terms of conciseness, completeness, and accuracy, which of these models do better. And depends on the context. Sometimes maybe people want more complete or more concise. Those are different, but accuracy is something that probably everybody cares more. And in compared to the baseline, our models were performing better, Cloud and DeepSeek and GPT. But Cloud generally did better. And we know that for types of code tasks, Cloud generally does better than, for example, GPT. And when we compared, we found that Cloud had statistically better significant, in compared the differences was statistically significant between DeepSeek and GPT. But between these two, we didn't find any statistical significance between them. This was a p-value, adjusted p-value that we had. So generally, PryGen does better than baseline, but PryGen with using Claude as the LLM was also better than the other 2 models. And we wanted to also see that how is the similarity, semantic similarity between baseline and the PryGen. And we used also privacy experts beside judges. And we also used some of the metrics. And here we had that they were basically showing that they're semantically similar with BART score closer to 0 means that higher similarity. But with Rouge score, when we look at it, it's like 33% precision. Rouge means that how many of the tokens, how many of the words basically are matching one-to-one to each other. So it's not that they're semantically similar, they're exactly same. And so our result shows that between these models, even though they are semantically similar, they use different vocabularies when they are generating privacy statements. So they were still good enough, but we knew from the first one that Pride and Cloud was doing like better in terms of accuracy and conciseness and also completeness. We again also try to see what's the difference between them. This was between baseline and the PryGen. Lots of like the captures, like this one captures some of the essence. This is a bit more detailed, more fine-grained, but also in terms of the purposes, our approach provides a purpose, which is important for privacy notices. And it's not as clear the purpose, like it's very much more vague with the baseline approach without having the taint analysis part. So our model was like outperforming the baseline, and Claude was doing better. We had high semantic similarity between different versions of LLM for our models, but we mostly use all of the proprietary models, so we have less control about like lots of things. So it would be nice to go with some open source model, and also having like a little bit like maybe smaller models. We should try that to see, because like not everybody has access to these large models. And like we had like domain experts, but we still cannot guarantee that they didn't like have like all of the criteria we wanted. And also we had some false positive, false negative in our results, so we have impacted by them. But like this is the first approach that like basically goes end to end from source code to natural language statements, and helps to try, because it goes from directly translating, tries to like at least resolve or mitigate those inconsistencies that we saw with generators. But in future, we want to like try with smaller models. We improved the taint analysis because we didn't capture all of the APIs, and also like generate privacy labels beside these privacy statements. And just the last things, like generally what we found is that the software team members are more familiar with GDPR. If you look at ethics, they're more familiar with EU AI Act, and like some of them are familiar with NIST. AI developers are more familiar with technical concepts of ethics, and they also use more technical tools. And EU participants, we believe, they are more cautious about their knowledge. And they also use forums, and they have different motivations, but they don't. They use various methods for credibility, but some of them they don't also assess the credibility. And we found that consent or notice, like giving notice, is the most challenging aspects in GDPR, at least based on our survey and based on the forum analysis that we have. We have lots of tools, like they're all open source. These are some of them, not all of the tools that we have. If you go to the Percy lab, like there are lots of the tools, and also data sets that we have are all available. They're taking photos. And I have like lots of collaborators on these studies. Like there are other studies I didn't acknowledge the other ones, but these are my main collaborators for these few studies that I had. And like some of the students that they work directly on these, and then there are many other students from my lab that they have done different works, like for evaluation and all these things. And these are some of the papers related to these studies. Thanks.